Hello, everyone. Harry here. Before we dive into today's special episode, I wanted to pass along some exciting news about an upcoming event in San Diego that if you are in the vicinity, I think you won't want to miss. On Wednesday, February 5th, we'll be welcoming Chris Hayes, the Emmy Award-winning host of All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC, for a conversation anchored in his new book, The Siren's Call. The event is part of our ongoing Talking San Diego series of live conversations. For tickets and more information, visit talkingsandiego.net. And here's our special emergency episode. Welcome to a special episode of Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. Donald Trump has wasted no time in pursuing his agenda of revenge against the career prosecutors who worked on his cases. His administration has fired the core of Jack Smith's team expressly and solely for their role in the prosecutions. Meanwhile, his handpicked acting U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, a prominent election denier and supporter of the January 6th insurrectionists, has launched an investigation into an aspect of Trump's prosecution in that office. And adding a little extra layer of cruelty, the acting U.S. attorney has ordered the review to be conducted by senior supervisors within the office. These edicts are just part of a broader wave of unprecedented moves that have left the vast majority of career prosecutors across the country shaken and uncertain. And of course, the ultimate cost of this needless radical overhaul is public safety and the well-being of the American people. To explain the gravity of Trump's reprisal campaign and its impact on the Department of Justice's core institutional identity, we've enlisted a powerhouse team of seasoned DOJ alumni, a trio with roughly 70 years of combined experience, spanning roles from the front lines to the front office and from Main Justice to United States Attorney's offices. And they are Paul Fishman. He heads Arnold & Porter's crisis management and strategic response team and is a member of the firm's white-collar defense, commercial litigation, securities enforcement, and appellate practices. He did everything at DOJ, a line prosecutor, a first assistant U.S. attorney, a very senior official at Main Justice, and the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey, in which position he served from 2009 to 2017. Thank you for joining, Paul Fishman.
Always a treat to be with you, Harry.
Amy Jeffress, Paul Fishman's partner, some people know her as, but she's a litigation...
nobody knows her as that.
partner at Arnold & Porter, where she co-chairs the firm's white-collar defense and investigations practice. She served as the DOJ's attaché to the U.S. Embassy in London, where she coordinated cooperation between U.S. and U.K. authorities in criminal matters, but she also was a former counselor to the Attorney General across the hall on the 5th floor of Main Justice, as well as an assistant U.S. attorney for many years in the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for being here, Amy Jeffress.
Thank you for having me, Harry.
And Mimi Rocah, who has had to take a hiatus from a lot of commentary while she served as the elected district attorney in Westchester County. She's a former federal prosecutor for the fabled Southern District of New York. She served there for over 16 years, including heading a satellite office. She is currently a professor at Fordham Law School. Welcome, Mimi. Good to have you back.
Thanks, Harry. Great to be back with you.
Let's just start with the overriding question and dig down from there. But as you see it, how grave is the current state of affairs at the department?
So I think things are extremely grave. And I really have been trying to not sound the 5-alarm fire for every single thing that happens. But I think part of the issue, at least the other places, but we're talking mainly about DOJ, is the taking the different things that have happened together. If it were any one of these things, we would be alarmed, we would be concerned, we would be talking about it. But when you take them together as a whole, and by them, I'm referring to the firing of the IGs, although the DOJ IG was not fired, but it doesn't matter because the firing of all of them together and the possibility that he might be fired, it eliminates real oversight by people who can hold any of these agencies accountable. The hiring freeze itself, not so unusual during a change in administrations, but the rescission of offers to not just prosecutors, but interns and honors program hires, it sends a signal that if you were hired by this prior administration, boom, you are tainted. It has nothing to do with merit or efficiency. Half of these were unpaid and brilliant, would have been brilliant additions. And I'll just give one more example. I mean, I could go on and on, but the sort of quote, the buyout, as it's being called, which I don't even know if we should call it that, because I think it's still debatable what exactly the terms of it are. But the fact, I'm not even talking about that there might be some kind of buyout, but the fact that with a hiring freeze, you are simultaneously trying to essentially push out employees, right? They fired the ones who worked on the Jack Smith cases. That in and of itself is concerning. They reassigned career national security officials to essentially push them out. They put them in the immigration basement, I'm calling it, so that they would be forced to resign. And now you're sending this memo to people that really makes it tempting for them to leave. The people who are there, who are experienced career prosecutors, employees, everybody. And that memo didn't come from DOJ. It came from OPM. And that is one of the weirdest things, at least in the Southern District of New York, that never happened. Everything came through our agency and frankly through our office. And it would have come from our U.S. attorney with an explanation. And, if it was bad news, it was going to be explained. So, I mean, I've already gone on too long, but I don't know how to quite convey how all of this together has created this incredible atmosphere of fear and paralyzation at Main Justice, and even I think at the U.S. attorney's offices around the country. And that is not good for anyone, because nobody can work in those circumstances.
If I could just set out in a bit more detail some of the actions that have been taken at the Department of Justice. So initially, a number of officials were reassigned to jobs that were either jobs that don't exist right now, like serving on the Sanctuary Cities Task Force, which isn't doing anything, doesn't have any role or function at this time. And then others were transferred to positions far below their ability and experience levels. Then people involved with the various prosecutions that the Trump administration didn't like have been fired, so terminated without cause, in my view. And then in addition to the terminations and the reassignments, there are the revocations of offers, which Mimi described very well. And all of these actions are cruel, and they are abusive, but they are also bad government. So what we have are people coming in and taking the top talent at the Department of Justice and putting them in positions where they really can't perform effectively. So what is going to happen to our prosecutions of, espionage cases and counterterrorism cases? What is going to happen at the U.S. Attorney's Office with the day-to-day violent crime that office has to address? The Trump administration's goal was to traumatize the federal workforce. And the way Mimi put it, they have done that, but they are also, it's just bad government. And that's what America needs to hear, is that this is really damaging for not just the institution of the Department of Justice, which all of us know and love, but the broader public might not understand the consequences for, safety, for fighting crime, for just the causes that all Americans would believe in, that they're just, destroying. So I think that this is really a bigger problem. And then we can talk all day about how cruel and abusive it is and the families that are being affected, the kids whose parents now don't have jobs to send them to school and pay the rent. I mean, those are cruel and awful, but let's just also talk about what a terrible set of actions this has been for America.
Right. So all of that, Harry, is like spectacularly true. Amy and Mimi both, totally obviously get what the impact is on the workforce and on the department. And there are examples, like the senior most guy in the department who knows everything about everything that's happened in espionage for the last 30 years, and the most senior guy who knows the most about international affairs and what relationships the Department of Justice has with its counterparts around the world. They're just not in those jobs anymore. And that institutional history, that expertise is just moved out of the way as if it's unnecessary, which is crazy and very, very, very dangerous. But I want to, at the risk of taking issue with something you said at the top of the podcast, you characterize this as, and I know you didn't mean it quite this way, as Trump's petty campaign of retribution or vengeance. It is certainly that, but that actually does not really adequately explain what this is really about. What this is really about is taking all of the norms of the Department of Justice that have existed for years and years and years about independence, about it's almost a cliche to say following the facts and the law, but trying to do it without thinking about what the political ramifications might be, and without thinking about, oh, we have to get that guy. Because in the entire time I've been associated with the Department of Justice, even as a defense lawyer or in the many jobs that you described I've had over time, I've never seen that in the work that I have been in charge of or watching or associated with. I've never seen the department behave that way. So that's an excuse for the Trump administration to actually do exactly that, right? By getting rid of the people who are institutionalists, people who are nonpartisan, independent, by getting them out of the way on the pretext that you don't like the way they handled their jobs because it affected you, Donald Trump. What instead he's doing is trying to bend the department into his own machine. And the two things, aside from the catalog of outrages that Amy and Mimi have already described, the two other things, one is that the interim or acting U.S. attorney in D.C. is going to supposedly investigate his own new supervisees about how they behaved when they charged the underlying January 6th stuff. That's just not the way this has ever worked. And what does that do? That's one thing. And the second is there's a memo that went out to the entire department from the administration, from the office, I can't remember, it's the Office of Administration of the Department, Justice Management Division, basically saying that there's going to be a reformed workforce, and it's going to revolve around 4 pillars. Return to office. Okay, they want everybody to be back in the office. I don't quarrel with that. Performance culture, excellence at every level. Okay, fine. More streamlined and flexible workforce. I don't know what that means. On its face sounds okay. But then the enhanced standards of conduct. Employees will be subject to enhanced standards of suitability and conduct. The federal workforce should be comprised of employees who are reliable, loyal, trustworthy, and who strive for excellence in their daily work. Nobody gets these jobs without having a full field background investigation and making sure they're loyal to the United States. That's part of the deal. So what does loyalty mean in this context? My fear is that people are being told you're either loyal to the president personally, loyal to the attorney general personally, or you're not on our team and you can't work in the Department of Justice anymore. And that is not normal. It's frightening. And it's a terrible way for the justice system to operate.
Okay. So first, I take your amendment, and I agree wholeheartedly. But I have a few comments. So I think we've had a cluster of problems, and we've covered many of the main ones. I would distinguish between all the callous and sometimes cruel, like literally sort of rubbing your nose in an aspect of some of these personnel moves. The Martin investigation, as you say, he's actually required the head people in the office to investigate in some undefined way
Can
the
I
people
can I
that
just interrupt on that, Harry?
Yeah.
Because this is maybe
that's your old office, so go for it. Yeah.
It is my old office, and what they are investigating is whether the prosecutors abused their authority in bringing the obstruction of justice charge that they initially brought against some of the January 6th defendants. And
I don't know about initially. I think it's in the wake of Fisher that he's hot and bothered, right?
Well, yes, but so the prosecutors initially brought the charge under Section 1512, and a number of judges found that it did apply to the circumstances of obstructing the congressional certification, and one judge found that it didn't apply, and it's a reasonable statutory interpretation question. I think that the judges all struggled with, but the Fisher case then went up on appeal, and the D.C. Circuit found that it did apply to the conduct of the January 6th defendant who was charged, and then it was many others who were charged with the same offense. And then the Supreme Court reversed and said that it didn't apply, but the Supreme Court was divided. So you have a judiciary which is divided on the question, and it's a close question, and certainly not clear that section of the law didn't apply to this conduct. And so now, though, he's asked for an investigation of whether the prosecutors abused their authority in bringing charges that the vast majority of the district court judges found did apply to the conduct. So it's a ridiculous investigation, and again, just designed to really undermine the day-to-day work of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is terrible for morale and terrible for what they do on a day-to-day basis, which is, protect public safety and fight crime.
Yeah. And
that's the point. And it's my turn. My turn.
Your show. It's your show.
Okay. Well, I'm going to actually be more active on this one than I normally would be, because what the DOJ actually did what the DOJ has always done and is supposed to do. They totally respected the 5-4 Barrett on the other side Fisher ruling, and they tried to salvage what they could, an absolute orthodox and routine thing to do in the wake of that reversal. So there's no argument about any kind of insubordination. The main point I wanted to make, the gloss on, I agree with everyone as everyone agrees with everyone, but I think some of these bad government things that really make DOJ folks suffer, they're one thing. But there are, the DNA of the DOJ, the institution of prosecuting without fear or favor, that's a categorical command. So in if it's violated, 3 times, all having to do with loyalty to the president, that means it just doesn't exist. It's not the kind of thing that you can asterisk, and that is really what they're doing. So you can't say, well, it's just, as the public might. I want to get back to Mimi's point about how we can really communicate how this so goes against the soul of the department. But just if it's forced even once to say, well, throw your rules out the window because the president has lost confidence in you. Why? Because, he was investigated with good reason. Then that's a deep problem. But in fact, and this just seconds what Amy says, I'm certain we all have had some connections with, all 4 of us, with field offices of the U.S. Attorney's offices. And I'm sure there's not an AUSA in the country who isn't thinking, what the hell happens if I have a political corruption case that involves a Republican and that might matter and Trump might care? Am I now not supposed to do it? What does it say about my job? So even though it's a grievous and absolutely defining sin as to the people who were fired for blamelessly doing their jobs, the ripple effects, I think, purposely are run cold throughout the department.
Yeah,
Paul,
one is the effect on morale, right? You've pointed that's and Amy and Mimi both said this. It's cruel. You said it too, but it's discouraging. It's not why people take these jobs, right? In fact, if anything, when they're interviewed for these jobs, I served in the United States Attorney's Office in New Jersey under President Reagan, President George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton. I was in the department. I wasn't
Michael
there
Chertoff.
Michael Chertoff, who was the U.S. attorney, but I was his first assistant. Like, never did we think about or talk. Sam Alito. Sam Alito was the U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 3 years. I was the criminal chief in during that time, and never once did Sam Alito ever even hint that political considerations would play any role in the cases we investigated, how we decided to charge, what we decided to charge, how we tried to resolve them, what we should say to the jury. Nothing, ever. And I don't even remember anybody ever reaching down from the Justice Department, Main Justice, from the Attorney General's office or anywhere else saying yes or no, other than on a considered discussion about the strength of the evidence, whether we might get a bad decision from a court because we were reaching too far or not far. Nothing, right? Nothing. This is very different than that. Yeah.
I just want to add to that.
Mimi, will you please? But can I put a gloss on too
Sure.
with the point you made? Because as I think you said at the very beginning, I mean, we're sort of at pains not to A, sound the alarm, but B, not to be too crazy because it won't be persuasive. Yeah, but that said, the points everyone's making, among other things, just are factual among people who have served there. And it's a very easy, and especially as promoted by Trump and company, supposition that, the old Justice Department did it, the new Justice Department did it. What I wanted to add to your plate, if I could, Mimi, is the question, how practically does one go about literally just trying to tell it straight and make people understand what truly is the case at the DOJ in the current landscape?
Look, I think it's hard. I think Amy made a fantastic point, so I'm going to re-emphasize it, which is we could sit here and talk for 2 hours about the morale at DOJ and how it's affecting them. And I will get back to that in a second. But most importantly, the chaos, right, which is apparently how Trump wants to govern in general. They are creating this chaotic atmosphere, both where nobody really knows what's going on. Who can be hired? Who can be fired? Are you getting a buyout? Are you not getting a buyout? And fear. Who can be, fired? Who could lose their job for doing X? Is someone reporting on their colleagues, right? They've been asked to report on their colleagues about DEI. None of this has anything to do with the actual downsizing of government, which is, frankly, a laudable goal. I think any of us who worked at any federal agency would say they can always be made more efficient, of course. This has absolutely nothing to do with that because it is being done in the most haphazard way and, in fact, making things completely inefficient because nobody can do their job in this atmosphere. And Amy's point about that being just absolutely, the bad government, because who in this country do we want? We as American citizens, I'm a private citizen now. Who do I want to be able to do their jobs really well? Law enforcement, prosecutors, medical personnel, people who have to do with life and death situations. And right now, I do not believe that any prosecutor or frankly, support staff or anyone working within the DOJ framework can do their job the way that we as Americans here who want to live safely, who want the crimes against children squad, who deals with internet crimes of people, child molesters online trying to target young kids. I mean, I did those cases every day at DOJ, at SDNY. Those people are paralyzed right now. I cannot sit here and speak for everybody who is working within the DOJ world, but I have a really good sense based on my time there. And even the policy, right? Like I think all of us expected that they would prioritize immigration crimes and take away resources from other places. They would increase prosecutions involving mandatory minimums. That happens from administration to administration. You can agree with that or disagree with that. Those are policy changes. That is not what this is. This is, I think Amy said, traumatizing the federal workforce, paralyzing DOJ and other agencies, and creating an atmosphere where, I don't know to what end, but this atmosphere where they cannot do their jobs. And that is simply not good for anybody. So I guess if I could convey anything to people, this isn't just about the thousands of employees of DOJ and how this is affecting them, or even the norms that we all cherish about DOJ. It's about public safety and supposedly the things that people cared about and voted for in voting for Trump, the things he said he was going to prioritize. This is going backwards on those.
Okay. We've adverted to it. One of the things I think listeners would be very eager to hear, none of us is in the department anymore, but all of us has friends or colleagues who are, or just things, that travel within our circles. Can anyone sort of put, no names necessary, but sort of flesh on the bones of this idea of confusion, chaos, and especially demoralization? We already knew some people were leaving, and there's been a raft of new ones. But any kind of actual sense of what it's like, on the ground these days at Main Justice or around the country?
I don't know that you can generalize, right? I mean, look, I went through a bunch of transitions between U.S. attorneys in the course of my time. I've been as a U.S. attorney. I reported to 4 different deputy attorneys general over the 7.5 years I was U.S. attorney, maybe even 5. And every time you get a new boss, and this is not unique to the U.S. Attorney's Office. This is not unique to the Department of Justice. Every time you get a new boss in the workplace, right? Everybody's always wondering sort of what it's going to be like. What's the new person going to be like? How are things going to change? Am I going to have more supervision or less supervision? Am I going to have different standards for doing my job? How will I be held accountable? Will I get reassigned to a different place in the office? That stuff happens. But what's been consistent during the times in which I've been in the department is that the people were nervous about that, but not about whether decisions would be made for reasons other than whether they were right or wrong as a matter of law and just simply sound judgment. And we certainly shouldn't conclude that every incoming United States attorney and every incoming component head in the Department of Justice or law enforcement agencies will be someone who is not capable of upholding those same norms and standards. And to the contrary, I think some of them will turn out to be maybe a lot of them, I'm hopeful, will turn out to be fine. But in the meantime, some of the decisions that this administration is clearly intent on making, picking an FBI director, let's start there, who is somebody who's basically said we should be punishing people. Right? That's really not the way the FBI is supposed to behave in a democratic society in which the rule of law is the one thing that binds us all together as a nation. Right? That's the whole idea, that we have this set of legal principles to which we adhere about democracy and the way the law works and the way the legal system works. And that is antithetical to that if that's the way he's going to think about his job. And I guess my point is that people need to be really vigilant to look at the decisions that are being made, who's making them, why they're making them, because this can be really insidious. It can be in your face. Certain things happen right away that look terrible, or it can creep up, right? Little decisions can be made that people can't see.
Or both.
Somebody makes one in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma, or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Missouri, or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, or the FBI in Ohio, and people don't necessarily see it right away. And people, because they get scared or are cowed, or they've put the wrong people in place, start making those decisions, and all of a sudden, it's happening a lot. And the justice system has been co-opted in service of the President of the United States, which is simply not the way it's supposed to be.
And more than that, it's pernicious. But I want to add a gloss. It's a darker gloss to what you said, Paul. It could be that you have a very professional cadre and, monkeys could type Hamlet. But there's a couple reasons for worrying here in particular. First, because loyalty has been such a focus of this crowd, and, Trump is adamant and intent on not being fooled again, as he was in his mind by Bill Barr or Sessions. So you have that entry-level qualification of being a loyalist, and that already cuts out, 95% of the professional people who are there, who of course know that the most important thing is the dedication to justice without fear or favor. So think of just all the people who were taken off the table for consideration for AGs, and I think this may be true of U.S. attorneys. And the illustration is the people we've mentioned: the acting attorney general and the acting U.S. attorney in Washington are people with, especially the latter, substantially no DOJ experience at all. So in order to narrow the field, to ferret out the strong minority of Trump loyalists, there's really not a big Venn diagram of overlap of those people and people who are schooled in the norms of the Department of Justice. Possibly Todd Blanche will turn out to have a little of that as an actual former AUSA. But in general, and Ed Michael, who has come in and issued the order of investigation, and whose only qualification is having been a Stop the Steal election denier, I think is going to be illustrative of what we're going to get. So not only loyalists, but people who just don't know their way, around the halls where federal criminal justice is concerned.
Yeah, again, I think you have to, Harry, you have to separate those two things. I know more than a handful of former United States attorneys who, when they started as United States attorneys, had no real experience in the criminal law. May have come out of, they were involved in campaigns. They had some experience in politics. They were aligned politically as opposed to personally with the president or with a senator, and that's how they got the job. And I know a lot of those people who succeeded quite well and were really good at their jobs, but they weren't motivated by something other than the best interests of the Justice Department. And that's what the concern you just expressed about this fellow in D.C. is that he actually believes that the prosecutions of the J6 defendants were not righteous prosecutions. So he's coming into...
It's more than that, Paul.
Right, yeah, no,
that's a job qualification for him. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you come into an office that has been focused in very large measure on a particularly large and important set of cases, in which, by the way, it's not like there's any doubt about what they did. You can watch the videotapes of those defendants assaulting police officers, right? There's no doubt that they did it. And to say to the people in that office, you shouldn't have brought those cases, and the fact that you brought those cases may be grounds to fire you or investigate you, that's a terrible message. Really terrible and really dangerous.
And by the way, investigate, I think, is purposely vague as between criminal and civil. Either way, it's completely outrageous for people who have just done their jobs. I see a maybe pregnant pause in Williamstown. Did you something you wanted to say? Yeah.
I got back online.
yeah.
I found it astonishing when I read, I think it was yesterday, that Brad Weinsheimer was one of the people who was involuntarily reassigned. The senior
Tell us
most
about him.
career. Yeah, he's the senior most career official in the Department of Justice. He was my supervisor in Superior Court felony cases when I was a prosecutor in D.C. He's been at the Department of Justice for a long time. He's been in a number of different all-career positions. He is not at all political. He's just a career person who's devoted his life to serving the public, and that's what he loves. And he has never been aligned particularly with one, political party or the other. I think he was likely reassigned because he happened to sign the letter that related to the Rob Hur investigation. But it really surprised me that he was on that list. Although it surprised me that many others were on the list. I mean, they didn't go after people who, were. I mean, these people
so far.
Yeah, I don't even know what Brad Weinsheimer's politics are. I never asked him. It was never relevant. I doubt that they're liberal, just given his personality. But it's just astonishing that someone like that would be in the crosshairs. But it's astonishing that many people are in the crosshairs whose politics just have never affected how they did their jobs.
I'll take it a step further. It's astonishing that anyone is, whatever their politics, because these are people, unless they've been, in fact, derelict in their jobs, which no one is. They're going to now try to imply, because there's, at the bottom of this, I find that there's always a lie at the bottom. And at the bottom is this suggestion that somehow these prosecutions weren't righteous, weren't meritorious, there weren't facts to support, there wasn't the law. Since that is wrong, and I think we could go for 2 hours just saying again and again, that's wrong. As a matter of fact, that's wrong. Then the sacking of anyone on the basis of doing their job or of any kind of adverse personnel action is just I think, anathema to the DOJ whole ethos. And, if it stands. Well, let me move there. We could go on for hours and hours. But back to, I guess, Mimi's point. It's not. None of us can see our way clear to the other side. But just to point out, this to me seems so much more worrisome, because in the only two analogs, 2021, when Trump tried to shake down the then department leadership, and the Saturday Night Massacre, it played out very quickly. It had a showdown. It was over. We're just starting in week 2 of the administration. It is hard to see what happens that makes this not stand, and hard to see, if things like this do stand, how the department hasn't absorbed a terrible, maybe even mortal blow. But in a sort of, as best we can to be sanguine, what is a sense of how maybe we do, in time, get out of this mess? What should, you probably feel this question all the time as I do, what should people who feel this is wrong be doing? Is there anything to do other than just stand by and watch the train wreck?
Well, I mean, can I answer? I'm going to answer your question with a question, which is, I do keep thinking...
To Paul. The question's to Paul, not to me.
Thanks.
Yes,
Thanks.
Sure. I do keep thinking, to what end? I keep saying that. Like, to what end are they even... I understand they want control. They want loyalty. They want revenge. They want, and so everything they're doing seemingly is in furtherance of those goals, at least in part. But as we've said now several times, at the end of the day, you need prosecutors in this country if you want to fulfill the goals that Donald Trump and his administration and people have not only said, but I believe actually want to happen, which is prosecute immigration crimes to the fullest extent, prosecute drug crimes to the fullest extent, prosecute gang violence, prosecute child predators. I mean, I think a lot of things that are said are lies, but I do believe they want those kinds of things. Certain kinds of terrorism crimes, certain kinds of national security crimes. So, but there will be no one to do those. I mean, they are freezing out the workforce that is there, not just the experienced ones, but really everyone. And they are making it impossible for people to do their jobs or to want to do these jobs that used to be coveted jobs that bright people of all political backgrounds went to. So to what end are they doing this? Do they just want the Department of Justice to grind to a halt so badly that then it doesn't even matter if these crimes get prosecuted? And if that really happens and people start to see crime rates go up, I'm not saying it will be we all know there's not quite the connection between prosecution and crime rates, but there will be some impact and people will start reading stories and hearing. And we already saw one of the January 6 people that was pardoned, was killed because he got into some kind of conflict with a police officer and he had a gun. So maybe that is the only way out of this, is for people to see the actual impact. But to what end is my question.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think that they're going to not ultimately, unless they do something on the budget that causes everybody to, we're looking at a number of legislative things on the legislative calendar that will have potentially some ability to wreak havoc on the federal budget. Right? They're still operating under continuing resolution. There's the prospect of a reconciliation bill. If you get to the end of April, then I can't remember the name of the statute kicks in, and every department has to cut its budget by 1% for this year, but they'll have already spent like 65% of their budget for this year. So that will be draconian too. I think until they get their arms around that problem and behind their promise to cut the federal workforce, I don't know you can make the assessment that you just described. I think they could withdraw all the offers, fire all the probationary employees, because they've already collected lists of all the probationary employees too. That's one thing you left off your list, right? Aside from the people who haven't started in the U.S. attorney's offices but have offers and have told their firms or whatever it is that they're leaving, right? That happens. Aside from pulling the honors program for all the people who are in clerkships or in law school who are planning on starting in the Department of Justice in September as part of this prestigious thing that you can do straight out of law school or straight out of a clerkship. They've also asked for lists of probationary employees. Those are the people who are on board doing the work, but who are hired in the last 1, 2, or 3 years, don't have their full field clearances yet, and basically are at-will employees. And nobody knows if those people are going to be let go. But ultimately, I think you're right. They will look at the scoreboard. They'll look at the number of people they have. They'll realize that if they want to do, 8 million immigration cases or drug cases or gang cases or fentanyl cases, they're going to need bodies to do that. So they will ramp back up. The question is, will there be a real emphasis on white collar crime? Maybe less. Will there be investigations of Republican officials? Maybe less. Right? And maybe that's not their focus. Maybe people are not inclined to start those investigations because they know they're going to get stopped in their tracks. Maybe people are going to get away with stuff that they wouldn't necessarily have gotten away with. Maybe that's the ultimate goal. But in the meantime, it seems pretty clear that the entire goal of everything that's happened in the last 9 days, and this has only been 9 days, right? In the last 9 days, is to bend the will of the executive branch in a totally new way in which there is no precedent to the will of the president and the people who are allied with the president in a particular way, not just on policy issues, but in something that's quite personal. And that is, I don't know how that plays out in the end in this particular space, but it's potentially terrible and dangerous.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thanks, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we whip through the whiskeys to find out the difference between the 3 main types: Scotch, bourbon, and rye. Whiskey, spelled without an E, is produced in Scotland and Canada, whereas whiskey, spelled with an E, means it's produced in the US and Ireland and includes Scotch, bourbon, and rye. It's these grains that help define which type of whiskey it will become, before it eventually lands among the thousands of bottles on the shelves at your local Total Wine & More. Now, let's talk about Scotch. Scotch is typically made from malted barley, blended with other grains, and that helps give it a little bit of a bite, making it more in an acquired taste. Bourbon must be made from at least 51% corn, produced in the US and aged in new charred oak barrels. The oak gives this brown liquid its signature sweet flavor. And then there's rye, which must be made from at least, yep, you guessed it, 51% rye. Rye is a type of grass in the wheat family that has a spicy, edgier flavor, adding a little extra kick you may not find in a bourbon. For a true test of bourbon versus rye, we recommend you pop into Total Wine, maybe grab a bottle of Scotch while you're here. But to really get to know the differences in Scotch, bourbon, and rye, start by talking to the guys at Total Wine & More, who are more than happy to talk day or night about whiskey, with or without an E.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. I want to take a swipe at Mimi's question, to what end, and suggest that it's, both sort of banal and simple and evil. I really think to what end? Right now, I agree. With the OMB debacle just today, we're like, oh shit, they're going to blunder, maybe the pardons as well. But what has driven these first moves? I really think there's a president here who's been elected who cares about nothing so much as trying to exact revenge that he was ever in the crosshairs of the DOJ and sort of make that go away in the eyes of the country. And I think the moves to date come from the top or people who want to please him. And it's been the sort of simple, let's just totally, make them wish they rue the day that they ever thought about prosecuting you. Now, that will hopefully give way to some, boss, by the way, violent crime is up everywhere and there's no, or maybe having exacted his pounds of flesh, he gets less interested in it. But I don't think it's a big mystery what's going on now and how antithetical it is to any kind of professional Department of Justice anywhere in the world and in democracy, which is they are putting in people to, definitely hit with 2x4s anyone who had the nerve to be involved in things. And that's how they know. That's who Ed Michael is. That's his very identity. By the way, nothing happened. You said we all saw it, Paul. He was there tweeting and said, they're fake media. There's really nothing going on here. I think it's that ugly, that banal, that sort of small and petty. That's what's driving it now. But as this shows, the OMB debacle shows they will blunder, and they have a very narrow operating edge in the Congress, and I think things are going to go awry. But for now, I think it's simply about aggregation of power and fear, and just trying to put all the chips that they can on his side of the table unconstitutionally, so he can dole them out and have a sort of maximum power around the world. But this is a special, nasty agenda on his part. I think that's what's happening. Silence from the cavalry. So that's been established.
You're totally right.
I'm answering Mimi's question.
Yeah, no, look,
since you did an inadequate, only partial job of it.
Well, I appreciate that. You are wiser than I am in so many ways. But I also look this is Bannon said publicly that the administration had to flood the zone, right? It's like carpet bombing. If you do outrageous thing after outrageous thing after outrageous thing, and you do they signed 40 executive orders in 9 days. Joe Biden signed 55 in a big year. Historically this is not how things roll out. If you do thing after thing after thing, it's hard for people who understand half of them or a third of them who are mad about them and outraged by them and understand how evil and insidious or terrible they are, to figure out where to pick your spots, right? That's the first problem. And the second is that they clearly know that some of the things they are doing are actually illegal or unconstitutional. Tim Kaine said it yesterday when the president basically issued a thing when the White House said, if you quit your job now, if you resign, we'll pay you to the end of the fiscal year, to the end of September, and you don't have to come to work, right? You'll just get 8 months of leave on the beach and you'll get paid. And Tim Kaine said, it's just like everything else that Donald Trump has ever said. He said he's going to pay you, and he's never going to pay you because there's no legal authority without an appropriation from Congress to do what he's doing. So what happens? Trump then says we did this. The courts will strike it down. He'll say it's the Biden appointees or the Clinton appointees on the court or the Bush appointees or even his own from the first term because he thinks he wasn't sufficiently discerning about who to put on the bench. And he gets to blame the courts. And we just keep trying to figure out which things to challenge in which order, knowing that no one has the capacity to take them all on, right? That's the way this works. And
that's right. And it's what can you get away with, not what's the law. We're almost out of time, so let me just serve up a final question for anyone. We don't all have to go around, but we all of us have a sense, not just what's important to the department, but of the department's institutional history, at least dating back, let's say, to post-Watergate and Ed Levy. Let's say he kind of gets away with it, and the department is both a miserable and an unprofessional place to be for 4 years. Then let's say a normal administration succeeds it. Is your sense that the kind of muscle memory of the department is sufficiently strong that notwithstanding having lived through such a breach of what it's about, it can sort of reconstitute itself and just, make that a sad chapter in the past? Or if he can kind of get away with it for a long period of time, is the department going to be kind of crippled going forward? That's a very speculative question, but I think a fair place to try to end with.
Yeah, Harry, thank you for asking that question because you're actually giving me some cause for hope by doing so. I feel like he won't be able to destroy the Department of Justice. I feel like it's too strong and it's, 100-year history is too deep. And I think that there are too many people there who live and breathe those traditions and those values day to day. And they can only fire so many people. They can only traumatize so many people. I mean, they're traumatizing a lot of people, but a good number will stay and the institution will survive. It's going to be a horrible couple years, but it'll survive.
Thus say we all. All right. All for one for all, you DOJ cavalry. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm sorry to say that I think we'll be calling on this group to reassemble with some frequency, but I'm happy to say that you're there to answer the call. So thanks very much.
You know where to find us, Harry. Happy to be here.
Okay.
Thanks, Harry.
Thank you so much, Paul, Amy, and Mimi. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review this podcast. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. And check us out on Substack at Talking Feds Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week to break down the various threats out there to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod, and you can look to see our latest offerings on Patreon. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so if you like the work we do and are inclined to support the show, joining our Patreon is the best way to do it. Oh, and if you haven't already heard, Talking Feds has joined forces with The Contrarian, a bold new media venture with a large array of prominent voices, all dedicated first and foremost to preserving democracy in these troubled times. Rest assured, we're still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in. And don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. Production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu, Genesis Magpayo, and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as always, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.